Hey everyone, so in this lecture, in this segment, we will talk about the second formed element, which are the leukocytes or the WBCs. Okay, so we did talk about the introductory part of blood. We did talk about the RBCs, and now we talk about leukocytes or WBCs. Same thing. We'll talk about the class, structural characteristic, functions, how they produce, disorders, and then finally we'll talk about platelets. So leukocytes or WBCs or white blood cells, these are the only formed elements that are complete cells, which means they do have a nuclei and some organelles, right? So which was completely unlike of the red blood cells. They did not have any RBCs, if you remember. Now the number of WBC, although, is very critically important. We have to have a range of WBC between 4,800 to 10,800 between 1 microliter of blood, which is less than 1% of the total blood volume. But this number is critically important. If it's too low or too high, then that's a problem for us. Now, the main general function of leukocytes is defending against diseases, and we're going to talk about that because there are different kinds of WBC who are involved in different kinds of functions, right? So let's begin that. So first of all, like I said, the number of leukocyte in our blood is critically important, right? So in case we have, in general, if we have some infection, then it is very normal for the WBC number to increase. Why is it normal? Because WBCs they fight against infection, so it is very normal. But if it goes above 11,000 per microliter of blood, this is of blood, okay? Microliter of blood, in that case, then that's slightly problematic, and that is called as leukocytosis. All right, but in general, leukocytes are of two categories: granulocytes and agranulocytes. Granulocytes means they do have granules. They have visible cytoplasmic granules which can be stained, and when you stain them, then they will get some color. There are three types: neutrophil, eosinophil, basophil. Agranulocyte, they do not have these granules. There are two types: lympho and monocytes. You can use this mnemonic to remember these names. Never let monkeys eat banana. N for neutrophil, L for lymphocyte, M for monocyte, E for eosinophil, B for basophil. All right, and notice the spellings. All right. So, in terms, when we divide, we'll see the granulocytes, the three: neutrophil, eosinophil, basophil. First of all, they not only will have granules, like you can see in this picture, especially visible here or here or here. There's lots of granules are there, right? So that's why they are granulocytes. Compared to here, it's almost nothing. And they might have slightly little bit in monocyte, but really less, almost nothing actually. So there are no granules in here. So therefore, granulocytes or agranulocytes. Now neutrophils, which is a bigger WBC, big WBC, they are also big in terms of their presence or the number. So 50 to 70% of our WBCs are actually neutrophil. Okay. Whenever we have a general infection, it is normal for neutrophil number to rise. Okay, that's the first one that will actually rise. Then eosinophil, which is 2 to 4%. And then basophil, which is really small in number, half to 1%. The agranulocytes, lymphocytes are also pretty high in number, 25 to 45%, and monocytes slightly less, 3 to 8%. All right. You don't have to exactly remember this percentage, but we'll have to remember their sort of range, like which one is present the most, which one present the least, like that. But the most critically important is their function. Okay, so granulocytes are three types: neutrophil, eosinophil, basophil, right? They're larger, but they're short-lived than RBCs. They have nuclei, and all these have nuclei, but they are lobed. Like, it's not just one nuclei, the nuclei is lobed. And if we see in the cytoplasmic granule, we can see that they can be stained with the right stain, and they do get that color of the stain. And they're phagocytic to some degree, means they're capable of digesting any foreign infections. Right? So neutrophil, like I said, these are the most numerous WBC. 50 to 70% of WBCs are neutrophils. They are big in size, twice of size of RBC. They have these granules, and that granules actually do take stains. Okay, both acidic and basic stains. And these granules actually produce an enzyme, a type of enzyme, hydrolytic enzymes, or antimicrobial protein that is called as defensin. Okay, so whenever we have some form of an infection, then it is normal for neutrophil to rise. Okay, these neutrophils are also called as polymorphonuclear nucleosides, or PMN, or polys, because their nuclei is lobed. They can have lobe between 3 to 6. For example, like see here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 lobes. Here also 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5. So 3 to 6 lobes, the nuclei will be lobed, and they will obviously have granules. That's their characteristic, physical characteristics. You will see all these slides in lab, actually, in models and in slides. And their function is to produce hydrolytic. So whenever we have infection, we will see neutrophils will rise. Eosinophil is the second granulocyte. Obviously, there's lots and lots of granules, but there's a little bit smaller in size than neutrophil, and their nuclei also is lobed, but we typically see 2 lobes, so it looks like an earmuff. Their granules also release digestive enzymes, all right? But these enzymes, they mostly work on parasitic infection, parasitic worms. So when we have a parasitic infection in our body, then eosinophils will rise. They also play an important role in allergies, in fighting allergies and asthma. Basophil are the rarest. Only half to 1% of WBC is basophil. Now they're deep purple in color if you stain them, and large and naturally, and also they have a large purplish black basophilic granule, right? So these are these granules, large purplish basophilic granules. These granules, they contain a chemical called histamine. Okay, what is this histamine? Histamine is an inflammatory chemicals and act as vasodilator that attracts WBCs to inflamed site, which means when we have an infection, suppose, or an injury to a particular blood vessels, then the white vessel means the blood vessel will widen, because suppose there is an infection somewhere, so around that infected area the blood vessel will widen up. Okay, and histamine will help in this widening process, because it acts as an vasodilator. Vasodilation means you are increasing the diameter of vessel, so vasodilator. Okay, and so whenever this happens, then like you have an infection, the blood vessel will dilate, and histamine will help in that. Why is that necessary? Means more blood can flow in that infected area, and more blood means there will be more WBCs that can rush in that area. Because we have an infection, we need WBC, so therefore histamine will help in that. So it is an inflammatory chemical. There is another thing that basophil has, is called heparin. Heparin is also it also is kind of naturally occurring blood thinning substance. So it helps blood from clotting. So whenever we need the blood actually to flow, then we might have heparin. Okay, for example, we do not want blood to clot within our heart vessels, right? So then heparin will be produced in those areas too much, so that blood is not like produced is not clotting in those heart vessels. So that is also being produced by basophils, and their function is kind of similar to mast cells. We'll talk about mast cells in immune system chapter. All right, so these are the two main functions of basophils. The other category of WBC is agranulocytes. They lack visible cytoplasmic granules. They are two types, lympho and monocytes. Now the interesting thing about agranulocyte is that they have a spherical or kidney-shaped nuclei. So let's see. So lymphocyte is also very numerous, accounts for approximately 25% of WBC. They have a large dark purple circular nuclei, right? So then like this whole thing is the nuclei. So you can see the nuclei is big. And because they're mostly found in the lymphoid tissues, which means lymph nodes, spleen, therefore they're called as the lymphocytes, means cells of the lymphoid tissues. Cytes means cell, but some we can see in blood also. They're super critical to immunity, and when we will get into the immune system chapter, we will actually talk about lymphocytes a lot. There are two kinds of lymphocyte. T lymphocytes and then B lymphocytes. So T lymphocytes are also called as these are also called as T cells. They act against virus and tumor infected cells. Okay. Now B lymphocytes are also called as B cells. They give rise to plasma cells, which gives rise to antibodies. Antibodies actually fight against foreign infections. All right. So they're super important, critically important. They're very important part of our immune system. The last one is monocyte. What is then monocyte is? Monocyte is the largest of all the nucleosides, but they're low in number, 3 to 8%. So they have abundant pale blue cytoplasm. But the interesting thing is they have U or a kidney-shaped nuclei. Okay. Now the main function of them that they act as macrophages. Whenever it's required, they become a phagocytic cell. Means they actually can kill or digest or eat up, in simple language, bacterial cells or parasites or virus. They can directly destroy it with the help of phagocytosis. And when we have this kind of infection, then it is capable that monocytes are capable of turning into macrophages and act like a phagocytic cell. And the secondary function is also they activate lymphocytes whenever it's required. All right. So lymphocyte, monocytes, the agranulocytes. Now let's talk about how are leukocytes produced. WBCs are produced. Of course, the process is called leukopyosis. Pyosis means synthesis. Two very important chemicals in leukopyosis is interleukin and CSF, or colony stimulating factors. Now you don't have to get into too much details of these process, but what we have to understand that lymphocytes can have the leukocytes can have two lines of origin. They can be originated from lymphoid stem cells, which will produce the lymphocytes, or they can originate from myeloid stem cells, which will give rise to the other elements, which means this basically. So the lymphoid, so firstly we have hemocytoblast or hematopoietic stem cells, from which all red blood cells, or all blood cells will be produced. Now if this hematocytoblast is producing WBC, then it will divide into myeloid and lymphoid stem cell. So when it is producing lymphoid stem cell, that will form T and B lymphocyte precursor, and which will give rise to T and B lymphocytes. So these lymphocytes are produced from the lymphoid stem cells. All right. Now again, the T lymphocyte will differentiate into effector T cell, which is the functional T cell, and B lymphocyte will become plasma cell eventually, which will give rise to the antibodies. Then the other cell line is the myeloid stem cell, which goes into various processes of development, and then it becomes the either of the granular leukocytes, either eosinophil, basophil, or neutrophil. So this, you don't have to remember all these intermediate names, just remember where is this coming from. For example, the lymphocytes coming from lymphoid stem cells, the neutrophil, eosinophil, basophil coming from the myeloid stem cells. All right. Now disorders. So what are disorders? Firstly, leukemia and infectious mononucleosis. So these are caused by overproduction of WBC. We'll come to that, but before that, we also can have low count of WBC, which is called as leukopenia. So first, let's talk about infectious mononucleosis. This is nothing very uncommon. You probably have heard about it. It's a viral disease. It's caused by a virus, and it simply means when we have these viral disease, then we will have rise in our WBC number. All right. Similar thing happens in leukemia, but it is way more critical than that, because it's involving an abnormal cell and overproduction of an abnormal cell, right? But it can come from two descendants. We can have myeloid leukemia or lymphocytic leukemia, means that either the leukemia can happen from lymphoid stem cell line or from the myeloid stem cell line. So either way, it's still blood cancer leukemia. All right. Now, if it's acute, that means it is quickly advancing and it derived from stem cells, basically derived from the stem cells, or basically derived from this segment of the developmental pathway, the stem cell pathway, then that is called acute. If it's chronic or slowly advancing, means it has gone into the proliferation stages. So means in the chronic case, in these stages, either of these cell lines is actually abnormal, and that is giving rise to the leukemia, and that is called as the chronic leukemia, which is more prevalent in older people. Now, leukemia and mononucleosis both means that there are high number of leukocytes, but we can have leukopenia, which means really low number of WBC, and this can be caused by actually anti-cancer drugs, because when a person is suffering from cancer, that person is taking cancerous drugs, which means he's trying to reduce this abnormal number of WBC. In that process, sometimes WBC count can go too low, and that is called as leukopenia. That concludes leukocytes. Now we'll talk about platelets, which is our last formed element, which is nothing but a fragment of a larger megakaryocyte. Let's talk about this first, then we'll come back to this. What is megakaryocytes? So again, the hematocytoblast or hematopoietic stem cell also gives rise to platelets. Now in this case, these hematopoietic stem cells goes rise to several developmental pathways, and these intermediate cells are called as megakaryoblast or megakaryocyte, anything. Now this goes through several stages and then gives rise to megakaryocyte. When it reaches stage 4, then it breaks off and produces platelets. Okay, the projection actually breaks off and then produces many platelets. Now platelets, although do not last in our blood for very long, only stays for 10 days, and the normal count is 150,000 to 400,000 platelets per ml of blood. Okay. Now when this developmental process is happening, an interesting thing is only the nucleus divides, actually the cytoplasm do not divide, and then finally it projects and forms platelets. Now the formation of platelets is called as thrombopoiesis, and a particular chemical actually helps in formation, that is called as thrombopoietin. Thrombo, the word thrombo actually means platelets or related to platelets. Now, what is the function of platelets? They are purple granules. They have purple granules. What do? They help in clotting process. There are several chemicals are actually involved, which are like platelets-derived factors, serotonin, calcium, enzyme. They are also involved in this clotting process. But the main job of platelet is to form a temporary platelet plug. So suppose we have an injury from our blood vessels and we are losing blood, platelet will rush into the site and will kind of form a temporary plug into that process. Okay, and then finally that process will start, the healing process will start, and the injury will be repaired. But the platelets actually form the temporary plug, right? So that's the main function, helping in blood clotting so that we don't lose too much of blood. This is an important table which kind of summarizes all of the formed elements, their type, illustration, description, their numbers, how long they live, and their function. It's a very important table. You can use this for studying. This takes us to the concept checks. So now when we're talking about leukocytes, we'll be mainly talking about their functions. Okay, so functions, the questions related to leukocytes will come from function. Some can come from the number, like the normal number of leukocytes, but these are the two main areas. And then finally it will also relate to certain disorders like mononucleosis, then leukemia, all of that. Okay, so for example, an elevated neutrophil would be indicative of what? Definitely it is an indicative of an infection. We've discussed that. All right, now antihistamines counter the action of which white blood cells? Well, we did talk about, it's obviously one of them, and one of these WBCs actually produce this chemical called histamine. Okay, so whichever produces the histamine can counter the function of antihistamine or vice versa. So go back to the slides and work on like which will be the right answer of this guy. And then the third question is talking about leukemia. Now, what is leukemia? we discussed this is nothing but an overproduction of an abnormal leukocytes. It's not just normal leukocytes are going higher in number, it's just abnormal leukocyte. There's something is problematic, there's some mutation have happened in that leukocyte. Okay. The fourth question, these cells are important for fighting parasitic infections. So this is a pretty straightforward question. So we did talk about all of these types. You can also find this in this chart, that which one is actually, which of the WBCs help us in fighting parasitic type, specifically parasitic infections. All right, so work that on by yourself. The next thing we'll talk about is hemostasis. Hemostasis is the process by which actually we stop bleeding, and that's a normal process. So there are several clotting factors, how blood is clotted in our body. So that's the summary of the story. And then we'll obviously talk about blood groups, and then some important diagnostic important of blood testing and all of that. Okay, so that will be the last segment of this lecture, of this chapter. Continue to work on the concept checks, and the last segment I'll let you know when will be this concept checks due. Thanks.